Greetings, everybody, and welcome to Role Plays That Rock. It's a real pleasure to have you on this webinar today. We're going to be doing quite a bit in terms of going through a variety of materials related to role plays, and the real goal is to help your teams, your organizations sell more, close more, and serve better. So I'm going to go actually back and forth once between talking to you directly here, and then also I'll use some slides for a little bit. And so bear with me. You do have the ability to ask questions, and we would certainly enjoy having your questions. So if you're joining us through Google Hangout, there is a square in the top right of the screen. You should see it, and it's small. It's a small icon, and it's built of several small dots. And if you click on that, you should open up a Q&A box, and that will allow you to ask questions. We certainly invite any questions as we're going along, and we'll work very hard to address them all. So I'm going to now go to my slides here, and this will just take a moment. Okay, so let's open up the slides here, and any moment I should be projecting slides. And why isn't it? I am going to, do this one other way. 1 second. Sorry about that. And we'll do it again here. Oh my goodness. That didn't seem to help. Okay. Third time's going to be a charm, I'm sure. Here we go. Okay, this is much better. All right. So in a moment here, you should see my slides, and I'm actually going to skip on to the second slide here. So Confucius, obviously a very smart person, and a thought-provoking quote here. So I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. And that's really the goal of role playing. That's what role playing is all about, is to take what we know and make it habit, to make it natural, as opposed to what it is just if it's conceptual. And so we want to take that conceptual information, the conceptual knowledge, the learning, and then really apply that learning and make it so that it is essentially going from a situation where we're consciously competent in how to do things to a place where we're unconsciously competent, where we no longer have to think about it, where our responses become automatic. So I did want to share with you that we've received a whole bunch of questions. These are some examples of the questions we've received already, and we certainly invite more questions as we go along, and we will come back to these at the end to make sure that we've checked them all off, and any that we haven't, we will certainly talk more through. So let me get into the agenda here. So our agenda is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to talk a little bit about the background of role playing. We'll talk about some of the general challenges or normal challenges. We'll look at opportunities to improve the process. Then we'll identify the 3 steps to success. And again, we'll address your questions. And I'll stop this the screen share of the slides at that point and come back on the screen to talk through not only the questions that you've already posed, but any that you pose as we're going along. And again, feel free to pose questions as we go. And you should see an icon in your upper right-hand corner if you're in Google to be able to ask additional questions. So a little bit about me. I'm the founder of a company called Test My Pitch, and we've been around now for about 2 years. We have gotten quite a bit of exposure to not only the pitch world, but the role-playing world. Our tool is now being used by several organizations, by many organizations, to help their cohorts, their students, their employees role play in a variety of ways, but essentially it becomes a scenario-based learning. One disclaimer to offer here today is that, we've got a variety of interests and backgrounds on the phone, and everything from folks at universities to a variety of economic development organizations to some folks within corporations. And so there certainly our conversation around role playing will be fairly general, and we're more than happy to have specific conversations that would be very customized to your issues, your challenges, your use case. But I think what you're going to find is that a lot of this, what we're going to talk about, will apply. But understand that we're speaking really to a fairly broad audience, so we want to keep essentially the scenarios general enough so that it involves everybody, or it couldn't potentially be valuable for everybody. So just a quick note on Test My Pitch and Score My Pitch are two tools. Test My Pitch, very easy to imagine as Toastmasters taken online. So we create private communities of individuals who work together to develop communication skills. So that could be students, it could be entrepreneurs, or it could be professionals. And the tool helps both on the drafting and feedback side. It very much speeds up and improves that process so that not only do people draft much more quickly and better, but also they get and give much better feedback, because it's all contextual and sort of goal-based feedback. And Score My Pitch is a pitch event judging and feedback system. So it essentially captures the wisdom in the room at any type of communication event, and it's used from entry into programs and judging those to judging all different types of communication events, whether that's within a corporation or out in the sort of the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And certainly glad to chat with anybody more about these, and you'll see my contact information below. So enough about that. Let's get into our topic of role playing. So role playing, it's actually an amazing, really an amazing exercise or opportunity. And the background, if you think about kind of all the places where role playing are and where role playing exists, it really is pervasive. It's everywhere, and it's funny. Where we find it least actually is in business. Of the most common activities, you'll see that role playing is really everywhere. So you look at sports, and obviously on the screen now is a small child playing basketball, but throughout sports, at the very highest level, athletes role play. They practice consistently. They practice pretty much every day, or purposefully rest and retool. But the process of sports is really amazing. I mean, you look at the amount of practice that athletes put into their sport, and it's really pretty cool. So looking at just taking a young child here, one of the most common things that young children do, and this goes from that young age all the way to fairly mature and seasoned athletes, is they practice the end of the event. So in other words, in basketball, it's very normal that you would hear kids in a basketball court counting down like it was the end of the game or the end of the half, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And at 1, they release the game-winning shot. And they're role-playing, they're practicing that moment. So if or when they get in that situation in real life, it now is like they've been there before. They've put themselves, they preceded that event and prepared themselves in a way that will make them more comfortable and more confident when they get into that situation, and ultimately more competent when they get into that situation, because they're not just practicing the physical act, they're practicing the mental act as well, that mental preparation, which is so key. That rehearsal is really a big part of it. So looking at rehearsal, and now the image has changed to a gymnast who's dreaming or visualizing being on the balance beam. And so this is a big part of sports as well. And certainly in higher level sports, visualization it could be as much as even a quarter or 30% of an athlete's practice time, is that they're practicing mentally, so all the steps. And again, so that when they get in that moment, it's like they've been there before, and it's much easier to do something a second, a third, a fourth, and a fifth time. But it's very rare that you get the chance to compete, for example, for an Olympic gold medal. But you can practice it in your head. You can go there in your head every day of the week, multiple times a day. And so not only that physical practicing that athletes do, both sort of working on their physical capability, their dexterity, their strength, their speed, all of those things, but also the mental capacity to be able to handle unique situations, pressure moments, doing the right thing when nothing seems to go right, and the ability to stay focused on the things that you control are all things that are really key for athletes and very transferable to professional role playing or role playing for professionals. Bobby Knight, the great philosopher, maybe not at the same level as Confucius, but still pretty darn good, said that the key is not the will to win. Everybody has that. It is the will to prepare to win that is important. So the idea that you need to practice to win, and he looked and looks for athletes who are ready to commit themselves and do commit themselves to preparing to win. And that's, for him, the most valuable athlete are those that are ready to role play. They're ready to do the activities that cause the result. So not only is role playing a key for sports, but it's also an important component of performing arts. So you look at whether it's ballerina, whether it's a musician, or whether it's somebody on the stage, any of the performing arts also role plays. Their performances are live, and so having that that preparation that allows them to perform at a peak level as they intend to at the first show, the second show, the fifth show, the 20th show, the 100th show, it takes practice. It takes coordination. It's one thing to do it by yourself, but when you're in an ensemble, it's even more challenging. It's not only your actions being appropriate and on time, but it's also integrating those with the rest of the group. And so making sure that that your activities are spot on and just right is really a key. And so when you're in an ensemble or when you're in a stage company, you not only practice together, but you actually do a dress rehearsal, and you may do a few of them. And more often than not, they're in front of a live audience. And so they're doing these practices and they're getting the responses, and they're essentially doing everything but having the first show. They're getting in all the components of success. Actually, just going back to sports for a moment, thinking of baseball, they have a whole series of games before they start the season, just as they do in football. And they have exhibition games. And so, all of that is practice. And so it allows them to do things that maybe take risks or do certain things that they wouldn't do in a game that counted or in an event that counted. And they can test things. They can kind of see how certain ways of doing things work. And then when they get in the real game, again, they're going to be doing the things that have worked for them, that they've tested, that they're confident in, and so on. So weddings have dress rehearsals. And so, again, the whole idea of role playing, you're not only sort of in and everybody goes through the physical parts of going through the wedding. They're getting into the right positions and so on, but they're actually practicing the words as well. They're practicing sort of all the components of that, and they have observers who are also adding to the flavor. They're adding reaction and whatnot, and allowing these individuals to get comfortable and not just competent, but also confident, which adds quite a bit to how role playing really impacts success. So, one more example on role playing, and for the parents who are watching this, this may be very familiar. So, children don't always behave as we would want them to, and a very normal thing that parents do is they role play activities uh, quite often, frequently, before the activity happens. So maybe we're getting ready to go to Thanksgiving at grandma and grandpa's house, and we're going to role play how what kind of behavior is going to be desired there. So we might role play scripting in terms of what type of greeting we might do, how we might shake hands, how we might hug, whatever sort of the common convention is. We'll role play that. We'll role play how we eat dinner, and how we say thank you and please, may I, and so on. It's all these things that get role played, and it may happen. It may happen days or weeks before. It may happen on the car ride there. It may happen multiple times in preparation for some of these bigger family events, or bigger school events, or bigger events where we're going to stay overnight at a friend's home. All these things get role played. It might also be when we go out shopping, or food shopping or clothes shopping or any of that stuff. All these things get role played, and ideally, that's putting the child into that moment, that we want them to perform in a certain way, so that when they're actually in that moment for real, it's just like they've been there before, and it's rehearsed. They know how to perform, and so it allows us, if we don't perform, or if they don't perform as we hoped, it allows us to actually come back to that learning, to that lesson, and reinforce it in the moment, and get them sort of back on track. So that rehearsal not only helps drive the positive behavior we're intending, but it also is a reference point to come back to, so that we can draw the child or the individual or the staff member or the entrepreneur to a place where, you'll recall from what we practice, this is what we do. And so role playing with children is key. And of course, we want to have them perform well in these moments, not just for our sake, but for their sake. We want them to perform well, really, most of all, for their sake, because we want them to enjoy life, to be productive. We want our family to enjoy them being around and to invite them being there. It's all these things. And again, this transcends all of these activities. We want the athlete to perform to their potential, and to the highest level that they can. We want the performance artists to perform at the highest level they can, and to find their own success. And we certainly want our staff members, our cohorts, and so on, to find their best success as well. And role playing is just a huge, and can be a really, really big part of this. So one of the questions that sort of probably is coming to mind at this point is, how do I find the right practice to performance ratio? In other words, how much do we need to dedicate to practicing versus, essentially getting out on the road, whether we're in our team is in a sales capacity, or they're in a service capacity, or they're entrepreneurs building a business, or students building their sort of resume, and so on. How much practice do we need to do? Well, it's not hard to think that, from some of the examples that we've given, that I certainly have seen in sports where you're going to be, getting pretty normally and without a lot of work to the 30 to 50% range in terms of how much practice to performance athletes have. And that's the formal practice to performance. That's not including the informal practice to performance. So things like where they might go and play their sport sort of more casually, or they might be visualizing, or they might be doing a variety of activities that could also be considered rehearsal or preparation. But a very normal place is sort of 30 to 50 to 1 in terms of practice to performance for athletes. It's probably fairly similar for performance artists. You parents know what it is with children. Certainly, there's a lot of preparation for the big events that we might take our children to. So I think, every organization, every sort of situation is going to call for somewhat a different practice to performance ratio, but it's a question we're going to come back to at the end, and ideally we'll have maybe uncovered, at least for some of us, what might be good or starting ratios here. So let's get into talking about some of the challenges as relates to role playing. The first, and this I think probably most people can imagine, and that is resistance. And this quite often is what actually keeps us from really even starting down the road of having our team, our individuals begin role playing. Is just, it's something new, it's something different, it's something they're not used to doing, it's something we're not used to doing. And so we are creatures of habit. It's easier for us to not do something than to do something, and it's also highly uncomfortable. If it's a new activity, it's absolutely uncomfortable. And just as practice is for an athlete when they're trying new techniques or whatnot, that's less comfortable. But guess what? As they practice more, it becomes more comfortable. So here's an interesting statistic: 74% of the population suffers from what's called glossophobia, which is the fear of public speaking. This is according to the National Institute of Mental Health. So we don't want to practice public speaking. The idea of role playing is something that is very similar. Certainly a part of it is public speaking. And so it's something that we're just not comfortable with. And but the cool thing is as we do it, it becomes more comfortable. No one wants, when they're starting a new exercise regime, they don't want to go to the gym in the same way. When they're, practicing for maybe performing on stage, the beginning is always the most difficult. Leaving the front door is really hard. But the key is to get past that resistance, to essentially, if it's appropriate, do something that you might think of as a forced march. We need to get the process going, and then kind of make it more of a habit, make it easier because we've done it before. And it's amazing how just after a few opportunities, a few iterations, it gets easier and better. So the second issue, or the second challenge, is past resistance is really the lack of commitment. It's just like exercise or being good at playing an instrument. It takes commitment. It takes being consistent and making sure that we're continuing to practice, continuing to develop our skills. And so committing ourselves and making it important is really a key part of the process. And unless we get off the couch, not much is going to change. So Zig Ziglar, certainly very smart in terms of behavior development. It was character that got us out of bed, commitment that moved us into action, and discipline that enabled us to follow through. So again, commitment coming in as a very strong part of our evolution, and it's the action that will help us evolve. The third issue with regard to challenge is the lack of a system. And so this certainly the sign points out some challenges ahead, and we don't want to sort of rest on good luck as a system. So having a way that we can role play and take that commitment and really apply it and make it easier and easier to apply it and to be consistent and complete is really a key to the process. So we want to use our time efficiently. We want to, one of the fears or concerns that we've heard is that, we don't want to take all of our meeting time in role playing, or we don't want to have to expand our meeting time to role play more. And so the idea of a system where people can self-learn or remotely learn or learn more on their own time and expand their skills more on sort of out of meeting time, these things become more and more attractive. But the idea is you have to have a system so that not only can we can assure that the individuals who we're working with to role play have a good experience and an efficient experience, but that the feedback that they get and give potentially is consistent. That it has some system behind it, or consistency behind it, and methodology. So having that system is key. So two quotes here from folks that you probably have heard of before. Jim Rohn: success is neither magical or mysterious. Success is the natural consequence of consistently applying basic fundamentals. And then, of course, Anthony Robbins, or Tony Robbins: it's not what we do once. It's not what we do once in a while that shapes our lives. It's what we do consistently. And again, it's about consistency. It's about systems that will help us continue to evolve and apply what we're learning. And it's really where the leverage is here. So we've looked at the challenges, and now to look at the opportunities, because we don't want to leave the cup half empty, because it certainly isn't. It's certainly much more than half full. So our opportunities, really, first and foremost, it's about when we think of what changes when we role play well. The most important thing is that we empower our people, we empower our cohorts, our students, and so on. And what is empowerment? What's the value of empowerment? It's really about getting people to do what we and they intend without our intervention, to allow them to think in the moment, to respond in the moment, and to be able to react naturally in the moment in a way that's congruent with the outcomes, again. And so that may be that if we're in sports, that without the coach's intervention, and the coach isn't on the field, so that the team and the individuals can react to the moment, to play situationally, and so that they respond to the conditions, expected or unexpected, in a way that helps the team win and helps the team succeed. Just as if we were in a sales situation or in an investor conversation, if we've role played this situation before, we would have the ability not only to respond to the specific scenario, but if we've role played enough, if we've role played to a degree that allows us to not just sort of regurgitate, but also it's allowed us to think and evolve, then we can respond really to any scenario. It's not just the scenarios that we've rehearsed, but now we've rehearsed enough that we're consciously competent, and we've moved to a place where we're unconsciously competent. We don't have to think about it. It's become natural, and all of these role plays have given us the ability to think. And when you sort of think about this sort of ideal situation for a manager, is really they're trying to get to two places. One is where their people can think and succeed on their own. That's a high leverage place. But then two is where their people can replace them, where they're preparing that next generation, where they're preparing for succession. It's very hard to get promoted if no one in your team is ready to take your place, and you become indispensable in your role, and so it's very hard to get promoted. So number one is, how do we empower people? And it's going to be by helping them prepare for situations so that they can act on their own without intervention and succeed and to be very successful. Second is we want to set up the team for success. We want them to be able to perform. We want them to learn new heights as they practice. We want them to be able to evolve quickly, and so having the framework that allows them to succeed. The best that a manager can hope for is that their people get promoted, either to opportunities within their department or out, or even get opportunities outside of the company. It's nice if we can promote people internally, but we want our people to succeed. The best managers want nothing but the best for their people, and that's generally how they retain them, is because they're promoting their people, not just in words, but also through preparation, through committing the time and effort to help their people get stronger and better and more effective. And when we do these things, we improve results. And it's not only because one person performs better, but the team performs better. And it's this concerted effort that makes results get better. And organizationally, we become more effective in our again, students or entrepreneurs or staff become more effective in their role. And that's really where we want to get to. So applying all of this, taking the opportunities and now applying them to how do we succeed, we really want to look at, where are the opportunities here. So this is an interesting quote. So studies show that push training programs only manage to transfer a mere 10 to 20% of the skills to the workplace. Pull learning is a model for the knowledge economy. So pull learning you could think of as scenario-based learning, and obviously push training is really about sharing information with individuals, and this graph might be a better way to understand this. So if we're lecturing or having people read, or we're giving them an audio-visual experience, typically the retention rate is not going to be above 20, maybe 30%. And if we involve them in discussion, then it might go up to 50%. But where the real retention success happens is when we get people, our staff, and so on, to practice, and even stronger when they become the teacher. And so the more we can do that, and this is exactly what role playing allows us to do, is to get people to rehearse the scenarios that we intend, or the scenarios that we expect, so that when they get in those moments, they're able to operate in a way that's congruent with the outcomes that we and they want. And so creating situations where practice and teaching happens, self-teaching, peer teaching, all of that, it's really, really key. So what we're really aiming to do is to get to this middle circle, and that's where our team develops the competence and the confidence that we want. In other words, they're able to demonstrate the behavior that we know will lead to success. And this is built on three general pillars. One is that they have to have the knowledge, and they have to have the skills, and of course they need the motivation and attitude in order to be able to develop the competence and confidence. And ultimately, we certainly know people who are competent. They have maybe the background or book knowledge or whatnot that you would think would allow them to be successful. Unfortunately, they haven't practiced enough, and they don't have the confidence. They've never been put in the situations where there's more pressure, or where they might feel more pressure. That might be in front of a customer. It might be in front of a larger audience. It might be in front of influential people. And so they don't have the confidence. And even as good of a confidence as they have, without the confidence, when they get into those moments, they will never perform as we hope. On the other hand, we've also met people and know people who are highly confident without very much competence. And so they get into those moments, and while they can act appropriately and they're confident, they're not stuttering and so on, they have no substance. They don't have the right messaging. They don't have the right tenor. And so unfortunately, that doesn't work very well either. And so we really need the blend of both of these, that competence and confidence together, mesh together, and working together. And that only comes through practice, through role playing and situational development. So step one, in terms of sort of how do we do this and where do we go, is really about orientation. We have to start with it might be training or a webinar or whatnot, but something that sort of lays the framework, lays the groundwork for individuals beginning the process of role playing. And in that, we certainly need to include what our purpose is, what the objectives are, what the personal benefits for each individual is, and any fundamental principles in terms of what's going to be done. If it's a sales role play, what are our objectives? How do we want to, what's the sort of outcomes that we want in terms of this interaction, and sort of what are the basics of doing it, and then to overview the process in terms of roles of each individual in the role play. And role plays sometimes have two individuals, somebody who is performing and somebody who's giving feedback. Other times they have three individuals. It might be somebody who's performing, somebody who's relating, and it might be that customer or that investor, and then somebody who's observing and giving feedback. So it could be sort of either two or three people in general, or two or three roles in general. But making sure people understand the process, and when they're in each role, what are their goals and obligations? What are they supposed to do when they're giving feedback versus when they're getting feedback? How do they receive feedback versus share feedback? Number two is we go then into the perform and feedback loop, and it's really kind of three stages here. One is to create and perform, and again, that might be a script and then the performance of that script, or it might be a script and videoing, or whatever that might be. But ultimately, it's about creating and performing. And then there's an observation that happens. It could be a self-observation. It could be peer. It could be mentor. It could be alumni. There could be faculty. There are all sorts of. It could be supervisor, manager, executives. There are lots of views that an observer could come from, but there's that observation role, and then there's feedback, and it's both about how do we give feedback so that it is most meaningful, and two is how do we receive feedback so that number one, we continue to get feedback. And then number two, that we internalize it and understand it well. And there are absolute techniques with each of these. So create and perform, observe, feedback, and it's a continuous loop because our development is ongoing. It's dynamic. The situations we're going to be putting ourselves in will evolve, and our skills incrementally grow. We get to certain levels, and we'll find that any human, any person in any role, skills plateau, and the obligation of training and role playing is to then begin moving those skills to the next level. And you may even see skills erode because we begin assuming as opposed to reacting and relating. And so we want to make sure we continue to bring that in. So again, just bringing this pyramid back, the idea here is we want to get people into the practice and into the teaching others, and that would be sort of the observer and feedback role would be the individuals who are giving, who are sort of operating that teacher role. So with skill building, the role playing gives us all sorts of neat skills that we build. We learn and evolve our skills of observation, of listening, of modeling individuals, of self-assessment, of peer assessment, of receiving feedback, of communicating our thoughts, of teamwork, being able to work in teams, of being open to evolve, creating that skill and that openness. And then finally, the idea of continual self-improvement. Again, our skills erode, they atrophy, they also plateau. And so none of us is able to sort of stay consistent without practice periodically and without role playing. And certainly it's a great onboarding technique. It gets people's skills and competencies and confidences high fairly quickly, but it's also needs to be a part of the regular practice. Again, look at your best athlete. They don't stop practicing. They don't stop role playing. They don't stop preparing. They don't stop dress rehearsing. It's consistent throughout. Step three is next level learning. So we started with some orientation, then we went into specific role playing, and then it's really about evolving. What are we going to do to evolve to next level? So we can add scenarios, we can add complexities, we can have our cohort, our team, take leadership roles in developing these things, the more that they're invested in it, the more there's going to be ownership, and the more you're going to remove the levels of resistance that you otherwise might find. So there's a thought about all this, and that is idea climbing. And so, a lot of us are focused on how do we get people to perform at not just a high level, but a level they never expected they could get to. And so this is some have probably heard about how the 4-minute mile was broken many years ago, and for years they thought that people would die. The physicians and whatnot thought that the athletes who were trying to break the 4-minute mile, there were actually theories where people thought the athlete that broke the 4-minute mile would die, their heart would explode, that much the same as probably breaking the sound barrier in airplanes. And in fact, that didn't happen. And in fact, when the first person was able to break the 4-minute mile, suddenly many people fairly quickly, within a matter of days, weeks, and months, then broke the 4-minute mile, because they realized that that time was no longer a barrier, that they were able to sort of get in and do it and take advantage of that. And so idea climbing is all about that. So it's how do we set continually more valuable limits, or in fact remove limits, so that we continue to sort of expand our capabilities without limits. And that's what idea climbing is about, where when we're role playing, we can get ourselves to better and better levels of performance, so that when we get in those moments where we need to perform, where we're in front of that crucial audience, or sort of need to act in a certain way, that we're able to do things that we never thought we could do. And it's more and more because of practice. It's more and more because we put ourselves in those situations in practice, in imagery, and both through sort of physical practice and through mental practice, so that we can get there. So idea climbing, a really key part of what role playing is. So some helpful hints in role playing. The best way that we found is to start simple. Start with one role play. Start with something that's of high value and meaningful, but not too involved, not too complicated. The second key, and this is really important, and this is what allows you to stay consistent, is it needs to be embedded in curriculum. Role playing is, it's really important that it be a part of the curriculum, that, and it may be not, curriculum may not be the right word for some, it may be your program, or your methodologies and so on, but it just like going to the gym, it should be a part of everyday activity. And so just like you know, any activity that you would do that would make you successful, the doing role playing and having it a part of that natural expectation will make it much easier to be consistent and therefore successful. Incrementally add to the expectations, incrementally add to the scenarios, and that will not only keep it fresh, but also continue to build on skills. And finally, to be consistent. Like anything that we want to do well, consistency is really a hallmark, and we can very quickly improve things that we're consistent with, and it's harder to develop good systems where we're not consistent. To that end, and a way to possibly start simple for some, and the intent here isn't, this isn't a sort of a sales pitch, but we did want to let you know that we're actually, in a couple of days, are going to be releasing a promotion for a new program that we're calling Stand Out in 30 Seconds. And we're actually packaging exactly what we talked about with these 3 steps into a program that will be available, and it may be relevant for some of you, but the idea is we'll conduct a webinar, we'll help with the role playing, and we'll also do follow-on webinars, but all around either the development of elevator pitches or around networking self-introduction. So if that's of interest to you, stay tuned. There'll be more information, and hopefully you find it really useful. So Um, so we come back to sort of where we started. What should your practice to performance or perform ratio be? And this is kind of a question that it may be a bit rhetorical because there are different situations out there for each organization. But the key here is that we really want you to begin to think about that. And our recommendation would be to start somewhere. And I would start just like you would if you were going back to the gym after you haven't been there in a while, or getting into an activity that you haven't done in a while. There are two things you want to do. Number one is you want to make sure that that your team is committed to it. So you don't want to overwhelm them, right? We don't want to give them too much weight or ask them to run for too long to begin with. We want to give them a modest exercise, a modest process. And the second is, so we want them to encourage them to come back. And two is we don't want to hurt them. So it's those two things. We don't want to sort of create a situation where they're not encouraged to come back. We want to make it exciting, interesting, and where they see results. And that's why we thought in starting with either an elevator pitch or a self-introduction where it can immediately go into use and they can see benefit, whether it's at their next networking event or out as they're out in the marketplace, but the ability to be able to very articulately in very few words be able to describe what they do or what their goals are or what their value proposition is. We thought whether sort of we work together on that or you do it independently, we thought that would be a really good place to start and help people see reward really quickly and see how well it fits into their sort of their success plan. So our next webinar, and we're going to go to questions next, but I'm actually going to stop the screen share to go to questions. So I wanted to let you know our next webinar is going to be on Thursday, December 17th. It's on listening, the secret to great communication. So the goal is to help your team connect and relate. And so what we're going to be going over are a variety of tools and methods for improving listening skills. And what we found and where most individuals, most organizations are really failing in terms of communication is really at the beginning, is understanding their audience. And so we're going to be talking about techniques for training and teaching your students, your entrepreneurs, your staff, how to listen better, how to listen more effectively, so that when they do communicate, their words resonate better with the audience. So we hope you'll join us for that. We hope you'll share this event with others. So let me go to our questions next. And these are the ones that you all posed. So what I'm going to do is stop the screen share and go back so that you can see me. And I am going to put the questions here in front of me. Any second, I'll be back to my, oops, one sec. And now I can see me. Yeah, you probably could see me before, but anyway, I had to do a couple things. So I'm back. Hope you all are well, and hope you all are still awake. So anyway, so the first question we had was, how do we understand the principles of role playing? So I think we've hit on most of what I'd want to say there. The only thing I would add is that the principles of role playing are really about scenario-based learning. And so the goal is really to get people into situations that we expect them to be in, again, just like we might our children or just like an athlete might, and to give them stimulus to respond to. So we want to challenge them to evolve their communication, evolve their mannerisms and their reaction to those situations in a way that will help them perform optimally, that will help them perform well. And that's a real key. So what I would say with any of these questions is feel free to ping us afterwards or to set up the time to chat. We're happy to go into more detail or talk specifically about your situation. I would also add that you're more than welcome to send us questions. Please use the questioning feature in Hangout or in Google Hangout or in YouTube, depending on where you're watching this from. and we'll respond to your questions there as well. So we're happy to take additional questions. So let's get to the next ones here. So I've kind of grouped ones that are similar. So this one is actually a grouping of 3 questions. So how do we get buy-in from participants to see the value of exercise, of the exercise, and embrace the activity as an effective and efficient way to learn? How do we get people past their initial resistance to role play and expand on multiple uses? And how do we make this exercise not hokey, which is one of my favorite questions? So, really, I think first when we look at how do we get our participants to see the value in these exercises, it's really about very much framing it around their success. And I've been in a lot of sales situations, and unfortunately, I've seen a lot of salespeople not perform well. And it was more often than not the salesperson's fault. They were in a situation where their managers were resisting helping develop in those individuals the tools that would allow that individual to be successful. And so, it's really actually easy when you're doing scenario-based learning, not only to help people develop skills, but also identify who can develop those skills and who might not be able to. And so to be able to see what individuals on our team can perform and take on certain roles or be put in certain situations, that can all happen through scenario-based learning, through role playing. And so we don't have to wait until we see someone not performing well out in the field. We can see it in our own offices. We can see it in our own in our own 4 walls, and then add to people's responsibility who are performing well in that way. And it's practice. We only get what we practice, and so if we're not practicing, we're likely not going to get there. So, but I think to answer the question specifically is to really whether we're aiming not to have things be hokey or we want to remove or reduce resistance. There are really a couple of things. One is to be very much team-centered, so to focus on, as we frame it, to focus on their success and how they're going to succeed by doing this. Keep it simple to start and get them in, help them see some success and let that build, and be consistent so that it's something that becomes a part of the regular routine. If it's something that's done punitively or otherwise, then it might be more difficult to be consistent and to get buy-in. This next set of questions is, again, I'm going to group together a few. So how do we effectively design and develop exercises? How do we execute and administer or handle the administration of exercises to ensure adequate time is spent on planning activities that learning opportunities boil up for group and individual discussion, and that disruption or distractive behaviors are minimized? And then how do we ensure that role plays are effective? So I think, these are all really good questions, and I grouped them together because they all are kind of aiming at the same thing, which is it's really about developing this in a way that is audience-centered, and our audience being whoever it is that we're working to help develop their skills. So the role plays should be congruent to the skills that we want them to build. They should be meaningful to helping them find success. And it may be that we do some role plays that build skills that lead to building skills that we want to build, because there are some skills that we need to have before we kind of move to the next level. And it may be that we build primary or foundational or fundamental skills first, and then we move on to higher level skill building. But it's really about having it so that there's an evolution. And one thing too, and certainly in these questions, it's easy to read that folks anticipate some pushback or challenges. And the easiest way to move past those or succeed through that resistance is to engage the team in helping evolve the content. It may not be the first iteration, but it may be when that's launched or released, is saying, hey, this is something we're developing. We feel it's really important in terms of your success and helping you sort of be successful in the organization or as you go out into the community. And this is something we know is not 100% yet. It's dynamic, and we want your feedback as we're doing this. We want to continue to develop and evolve how we role play, how we help you develop skills. And so we're going to say it now, and we're going to say it, every time we get together is, what can we do to make this better? What can we do to make this more effective? What can we do to align this learning and these role plays more with what you're seeing in the field, or more with what you anticipate, or in a way that helps you evolve your skills quicker? And not to say you take every idea in, but soliciting feedback will both help in terms of people understanding the doors are open for comment, but also it will help in terms of, you will get good ideas, you will get good input, and that's also key. A couple more questions, all again grouped together, and I would, again, if you do have additional questions, feel free to share them, and again, just input them into the questions in question capability in your screen, and we will we'll respond to those. So let's look at these next grouping. This next group are really specific to certain role play. So how do we begin a fundraising conversation, possibly making an ask is what they say. And then how do we have conversations about what value each member brings to the team? And then finally within this, how do we properly describe what we do in a few words for an elevator pitch? So all of these are sort of evolutionary, how we're going to develop the right way to make an ask, how we're going to develop our ability to have conversations about the value each member brings to the team, or to have the right words to concisely and cogently make an elevator pitch. All of these are, we're going to develop the skill and the right capability incrementally. So the best way to do it is to begin. And that seems really simple, and it may be a flippant answer, but not much happens until we start. And so finding a starting place is key. And as we kind of talked about earlier, starting simple. And we certainly, have tools that can help with this, and we're happy to help any of you with those tools, and really develop something that would be very much focused on your cohort or your team's evolution. But the real key is to develop the beginning and get people started. But I think from this, the real realization is that the development, the reason we're role playing is because it takes time, it takes effort to be able to develop skills that we need to be successful. And so, think of somebody who writes. They generally don't publish their first draft. They don't publish their second, and often not their third draft. It's a process, and quite often there are drafts in between the first and second, and drafts in between the second and third, and so on, that they don't share with other people, that are their own learning. And so it's absolutely the same with role playing. Is we are, the only way we get to that good role play to ask a customer for business, or to fundraise successfully, or do any of the activities that we intend, is that number one, we begin, and number two, we look at it as a journey, not as a destination. So we're always evolving, we're always taking input, we're always observing input, because some input is nonverbal. And so learning all of those skills really helps us evolve and succeed. So that would be our fervent wish for you. And hopefully this has helped answer many of the questions that you have. We are certainly very happy to answer additional questions. We are recording this, so this, if you've come in part way, you will be able to share this with you. I would think probably by tomorrow we'll be able to share this link with you. But we so appreciate you being with us today. We're happy to talk to anybody offline, and certainly let us know how we can help you. We will be sending out a brief survey and would love your input about how the webinar was and any thoughts you have in terms of future topics that would be helpful for you. So thank you again so much, and we hope you have a great weekend, and if we don't talk to you before, a great Thanksgiving. Thank you. Bye for now.